confidential. It's a small story about an average Joe, kind of hence the name, an average Joe who kind of figures out that he can time travel, and it's about getting back to his sister. But then as the series progresses, it's nice to kind of start to say, well, how do I it's one of the challenges, I think, is how do I continue to grow this series, and how do I continue to up the stakes, which is one of the kind of golden rules. You've got to try and up the stakes for everything and make everything a bit bigger, but at the same time somehow keeping it small. If you're writing character-based fiction, which I think is kind of how I would describe mine, you can have these huge setups, you can blow up as much stuff as you like, but you've got to care about the characters. So I think for me, it's about keeping a small character-driven story, but somehow expanding it as the series progresses. And that's a real, it's the daily challenge, I think, in terms of writing a series of books.
And so going off that question, we have a question from someone watching. Isabella asked, what do you feel is the most important element to you when creating your protagonist?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, it's one of these golden rules that, I don't want to sound like I'm just, I've got a lot of books back there about how you're supposed to do this, but I think the idea is that they're flawed, that they've got the cliche is obviously that they're an alcoholic and they're this and that, and that's just a flaw. But you kind of say it's more like character flaws, because I think the reason that we read fiction is because we want to see how other people deal with really difficult stuff. We hope that they're going to step up and solve stuff that and then kind of stand back and say, oh, yeah, maybe I could have done that too. So I think you've got to give them things that they've got to overcome, because then you learn something about that. You see how they have grown and changed. But I think for me, I've just got to I have to like them. I think if I think the character's interesting, then I've got to spend a hell of a lot of time with them. And if I think they're awful, I just won't want to write it, will I? So, unless they're so awful that you just can't wait to go and see them again. But as a main character, I think likability is important. It's certainly some feedback I had in the early stages was, your character isn't very likable, which makes you feel like, well, maybe I'm not very likable. But I think it's just a trick to try and make them that way.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really good advice. I think one thing I would say to, and I have said to aspiring authors, is you're going to spend a lot of time with these characters. As Nick said, you better like your character. If you find that getting up the next morning to write the book is a chore, like emptying the cat box or emptying the dishwasher, then you're probably in trouble. You better be having a lot of fun with the book. And I'm going to get myself in trouble here. I'm not going to name names, but there was a very, very popular mystery novel of a couple of years back that just sold a ton of books. I mean, just a ton of books. And I couldn't stand it because it was a he said, she said, and both of the protagonists were just awful human beings. And about 86 pages in, I was like, boy, I hope a bus hits the two of you and I can just get out of this story and move on to something else. I couldn't wait. This is an author who's sold a lot more books than I have, so clearly I don't know my butt from my elbow. But I do think a likable protagonist, a hero or a heroine to root for, somebody that you want to say, oh God, how's he going to get him out of that situation? I do, for me, I think that's vital.
Yeah, those are great tips for writing characters. And we have a question from Simon. This is for Nick. He said, we're listening to the audiobook right now. We're loving it. We're about 5 chapters in. Please tell me that there are more books in the series. Are there?
Well, it's lovely to hear about somebody actually listening to the audiobook, because that's kind of as an author, that's such a weird thing. I think audiobooks, I listen to them all the time. I'll read the book first and then I'll listen to the audiobook, and you get something completely different out of it. So yeah, I love hearing about the book that out there in the world being listened to. So thanks for that. But yeah, definitely there's more in the series. Yeah, I mean, there's I'm working on the 3rd book at the moment. There's definitely a 4th. All 4 books are with Blackstone. I've got in total 7 books planned loosely. I've got another 3 after that planned out. So I know where I'm going. So yeah, I mean, it just needs to keep going. I'd love to write more. So yeah, there's definitely 4 more in the pipeline. Maybe if I can, 7.
Awesome.
Oh, but book 2, book 2, the 2nd book is out in June.
So look for it, also from Blackstone.
Oh yes.
So another question, I love this one. Has your hometown, this is for both of you, influenced your story in any way, or do you pull entirely from different regions?
I'll take that one. I have been writing about Europe for a while now. I had 4 novels earlier with another publisher, and they took place throughout Europe. St. Nicholas Salvage and Wrecking takes place in Cyprus and the former Yugoslavia and France. And then Scirocco takes place in Cyprus, which is where my protagonists are headquartered, and in Spain primarily. So while I adore Portland, Oregon, I'm the biggest cheerleader fan. I love this town to pieces. I'm honored and thrilled to be a journalist working in this town. I do set my books elsewhere. I set my books in Europe because, and I know Nick, this is going to sound hilarious from your perspective, but that's really a long ways away from Idaho and Oregon, where I'm from. That's the far corners of far side of the planet. So it's very exotic for me to write a scene in Paris. And then of course, Katie King, my wife, and I, we get to go to these places and do the research, which is awesome. So yeah, my books take place. I've written 1 book here in Portland, but mostly not.
Yeah, and for me, it's pretty much the complete opposite. So, you know, I looked at some of your travels, Dana, and they look really cool. And obviously, I think that's a big part of it for you, isn't it? Getting the inspiration, you know, going to new locations, seeing that stuff and getting that inspiration pouring in. You know, I love to travel and I get very inspired when I travel. But when I first had the idea for the Joseph Bridgman series, I thought, where do I set this? I wanted to do something in the UK. And because, you know, the time travel, you know, it's going to be, you know, is it going to be like some sort of London or maybe Oxford or places that people had heard of? But the story was so kind of family oriented and so kind of small that I actually thought, well, I was living in Cheltenham at the time, which is in Gloucestershire in the UK, sort of fairly central. And I thought, well, nobody is really writing books based here. So I just thought, I'm just going to be different and just write something really small in a town in the UK. And and just have a normal guy, just have this incredible ability. And I just sort of thought, actually, it was quite nice it reined me in a way. And for me, the traveling now comes through time travel. So as the stories progress and get bigger, you know, the second one is based in London in the 60s. And the third book, I'm going back to 1873 and an opera house fire in Paris. And you kind of say, so for me, the stories are very small and based in what was my hometown for about 10 years. But the series allows me to fly all over the place. So yeah, as soon as COVID, you know, restrictions lift, then I'm hoping I can go and do a little bit of travel myself to get a bit of inspiration. Although obviously time traveling's off the cards. Although some readers do email me sometimes and say, is it autobiographical? And I have to say, well, no, you can't actually time travel. But
someone's holding out hope.
Well, and I got to say too that in your book, the juxtaposition of this dude walks down the street and goes to his favorite coffee shop and then goes into a place where he buys vinyl records and then he time travels is really great. It's that whiplash that the audience gets because this guy's got a life that I can identify with. My coffee shop is a block and a half this way. I know this guy's life, even though I've not been in your town. I so identify with him. So when the big change comes, it really creates this whiplash effect. It's very effective in your book.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, whiplash is a great way of putting it. I think that's exactly, you know, I based it a lot when I was quite young when I first went to New York, and the culture shock coming from a small town in the UK and then suddenly, you know, ending up walking out of the bus station into New York. The culture shock was huge, and I draw on that a lot when I imagine Joe time traveling. It's that kind of, it's not something I planned for him ever really to get used to, because I'm not sure you ever would. I mean, literally day becoming night and ending up in a different time zone, in a different place, a different culture. I'm not sure even a super experienced time traveler would just treat that as a walk in the park, unless it was actually a walk in the park.
We have another really great question from a viewer. Jeff writes, as you write, how much do you think about the reaction of readers versus what you like? Put another way, how much tension do you feel between making the book commercially appealing versus fulfilling to you?
I can take a swing at that if I could. I think one of the worst things you could do if you were trying to write a book is to ask the question, what's hot? If you say, I've decided I'm going to write a book, I'm going to go into my bookstore and say, what's the really hot genre right now? And the reason that's probably a bad idea is because genres change. And if you go in and they say, oh, well, it's very sexy teen vampires who sparkle. Got it, good. And then you spend 2 years writing the book and that train has left the station. Moreover, Nick, tell me if you disagree with this. I'm my first reader. I write books for me. I write books that make me think in the morning, man, I put my protagonist in a really bad situation. How the hell am I going to get her out of this now? So I'm writing books that I enjoy so that I have an energy for them. I can't wait to get back to them. I will sometimes, while I'm at work, I'm in a newspaper, look at my watch and think, God, I can get back to my book if I hurry out now. Because again, I've written all my books for me to enjoy. And that's how I keep up the energy and the excitement about writing them. And if I lose the energy in writing them, I'm guessing it'll translate into you reading them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, totally agree. I think, it's a funny one, isn't it? I didn't go into this I think there's a balance, isn't there? I think there's a sort of sliding scale where you kind of say, I try and find the sweet spot where I come up with an idea that I love, and I feel I can get my voice in there, and I can write it in a way that it's the sort of book that I would want to read. And I sort of start there. I don't mind putting a commercial lens onto that to kind of say, is this going to be potentially popular? And I'm one of those authors, yes, popular is fine with me. I love pop music, I love pop culture, I love all that stuff. So it's like popular is fine too, but I absolutely agree. Chasing to saying that's popular at the moment, therefore I am going to drag myself to my chair every day, hate writing every minute of it, but don't worry, it's going to be popular. That's not the gigs for me. So no, I think there's a sweet spot somewhere, and I think I try and have this balance. I go into my little writing room every day and I'm tapping away all on my own. It's like I don't want to care. At that point, I don't really care whether anybody likes it or wants to read it. I kind of really do, but I don't. And then it's a case of but I really do care about readers and wanting to surprise them and come up with twists and turns that they'll kind of go, oh my God, that's, how are you going to get that? So it's this really weird balance of kind of being in the zone and not really worrying about it, but also constantly thinking about readers and hoping I can write something that's going to be popular. I want my books to be popular. I want everyone to read them and love them. Obviously that's not the case, but you do.
So Barbara asked, is it really necessary to Americanize a book set in England? So I guess this one, Nick, is a little more for you. I
Well, that actually comes right back to that question really around popularity and readership. So for me, obviously, when I started out, I independently published, and I was just a UK author, and the books were in UK English. They've been converted down to US English, and that's mainly down to Blackstone, my publisher. They're based in the US, and we're going after a US market. So the odd S has become a Z, I guess. That was a decision I took. Apart from that, we didn't change the novel to be set in America. We didn't change any of the, every creative fictional decision is still absolutely with me, and it's in the UK. But yeah, we changed it to US English purely because I think UK English can jar for the American audience, whereas it doesn't. It's not. We just took the decision. It wasn't as bad the other way around.
As an aside of that, on an earlier book, I sold the Japanese rights to a book, and the publisher, my editor at the time, said, good news and bad news. Good news is they want to sell your book in Japan, and the bad news is they don't like where you introduced the villain. They don't, because I introduced the villain in chapter 1. We knew who'd done it from the very beginning, and they were not happy about that. They'd sort of like to change it. I said, well, damn, it's my book. What should we do? And his answer was, well, two things. One, they're paying you, and B, you can't read kanji. What do you care? It's like, oh, well, okay. I'm a whore. I'll take
it. So a question from Carl. He asked, I'd like to understand the journey of what your life before being an author was and how that transitioned into becoming an author. Was it just a decision one day to write, or a progressive journey?
I always wanted to be an author, and I always wanted to be a mystery writer because my dad was a huge fan of thrillers and mysteries, and he's a U.S. history teacher at high school level, and he got me hooked on him very early. So I had a weird thing. I will say that my first book got published through sheer dumb, stupid luck, and I was about 24 and I was a student at a community college at the time. And so that was incredibly lucky. I then had 3 books published, and then I had a 15-year dry period where I sold nothing. I wrote all that time, but I could have walked into a bank with a hostage note and not get anybody to read it during those 15 years. It was just bad. So I always wanted to be a novelist. I started writing novels when I was 20, and during the time when I couldn't sell a book, it was still the most fun thing to do at the end of the day, is to go home and crack open my novel and start thinking about the next scene. So always wanted to do this.
Yeah, and for me, no, I hadn't always wanted to do it. It was film was still is really my big love. So storytelling in kind of film and that kind of thing. So I started out writing kind of dystopian sci-fi, but I started out writing a film script. So I came up with this idea and I started writing a film script, and then I found that between the dialogue, I'd started to kind of write quite a lot of prose, and then I started to look at it and think, well, this is kind of a novel rather than a script. And then I thought, well, actually, some of my favorite films, it's always interesting when you can go back to the original source material. So I kind of stumbled into writing a novel just around the time when Kindle and all of that kind of ebook explosion had just happened, and it was literally it seemed like a brave thing to do was to just put it out into the world and see what happened. And very similar, the readership it was very slow to start with, but slowly started to build up. And one book was not going to scratch the itch, and it just sort of expanded from there. And then as soon as I came up with the sort of Joseph Bridgman idea, I think that was the point where I was working part-time. So I actually had I was a part of an agency. So I was working in the mornings on my writing, and then going into the agency in the afternoon and trying to sort of just work sort of part-time. And in the end, it just crept up to the point where I wasn't giving either enough. And I just thought, I've got to, if I don't commit to this, it's one of those regret moments, a little bit of a leap of faith. So just fully committed to it. And I think by the time you get to you've written a 4th book, you kind of thinking, yeah, this is kind of what I do. And I felt less like an imposter and more like, this is what I'm going to be doing now. That just took a little bit of time, but so yeah, I wasn't really planning to be a novelist, but like I said, you get to 4 books, you start looking at them and thinking, oh, okay, there's 9, nice, but you start getting to that point where you realize that there's a little bit of rubber on the road behind you, and that feels pretty good.
As an aside, I have to tell you, I was on a panel about a couple of weeks ago, and somebody asked me if I'd ever wanted to write dystopian novels, and I said, I'm a newspaper editor in a town that's got a pandemic, a recession, and wildfires. Dystopian is my day job.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So building off of that, kind of, Dana, you touched on this in your answer, but why did both of you choose to write mystery and thrillers? What draws you to that genre? Is that what you like to read in your pastime, or in your in your free time? Why this genre?
For me, I think it's yes, I read mysteries. I love mysteries. I read them all the time. And although I'm technically a thriller writer, my pivot foot never really left the mystery realm. And for me, it's this is weird saying it out loud. It's the competition, because when you write a mystery, you are literally competing. You're playing defense against the reader. You want them to not get to the end till you want them to get to the end. And when Josephine Tay wrote Brat Farrar in 1949, she knew I would read it in 1995, and she was going to make sure that I didn't get to the end. So she was playing defense and I was playing offense, and we were competing against each other. And when you go to the World Mystery Convention or Thriller Fest in New York City, you'll get the reader who will step up to you and go, "Oh, God, I thought for sure I figured out who did it. Oh, next time." Or, aha, I got that clue. I figured it out. I don't know, maybe this is unfair to say, but I don't suspect that poets get that. I mean, nobody ever says, aha, I had the pentameter, I saw that rhyme coming. It's like there is a push and pull between the reader and the writer in mysteries that I don't think you get in any other medium. I just love that. I love the fan mail. I love people calling me on stuff they found. It's just great.
Yeah, I think mysteries, I think for any book, really, rather than just saying mysteries, I think for any book, there's a certain element, whether it's a thriller or even a comedy, there's going to be some element of mystery about it. And I think you know, when you go quite deep in on the mystery thing, you know, for me, I'm a planner, or at least I've certainly ended up that way. I think with time travel, you probably need to be. You need to know where you're going. So there was something that stuck with me very early on, was something called RU, which is resist the urge to explain. And I think it might be Hitchcock maybe came up with that film. It's a filmmaking thing, but resist the urge to explain. And I think when I first started writing, I would write huge long chapters where the characters are all waffling into each other about all this cool stuff that I've wanted to get out of my head, and just blowing all the reveals and all the surprises and all that kind of stuff. So I think resisting the urge to explain is really about having all of these cool, it's like a, you know, the like passing the parcel, or, you know, when you unwrap a layer, you've got all this amazing stuff. The trick is to know all of that, all those things, all these incredible surprises that you're going to throw at the characters, and then retrofit it, wrap that up, keep wrapping it up with all these different layers. And then the real craft, I think, is to be able to rip off the various layers. And for it, you want the reader to say, no way, when they're reading it, but not actually mean no way, like no way, that would never happen. You want them to say, no way, that's it, that makes perfect sense, but I didn't see it coming, and that's such a good twist and turn and that kind of thing. So I think, you know, mysteries are they're a game, and I think I think the readers kind of agree to play along with that game, and resisting the urge to explain is basically saying, you want me to tell you, but you don't really. And that's one thing I've really learned as I've gone along, is to, every time I reveal something, I think, could I keep that just for a bit longer? Could I reveal just a little bit of that? And I think once you see this, you see it in all fiction, all movies, everything, that someone says something but then doesn't elaborate. It's like, if it's a scene in the movie, it's the scene where they say, well, that's not what your mum told me. And someone says, well, what do you mean? And then someone comes through and you think, oh, we're going to find out. So you've just given me a new itch to scratch now. So that's kind of what I love about the kind of mystery, is this idea of, you know, revealing something that makes sense but blows your mind. You know, Luke, I am your father is kind of the ultimate one, isn't it? You've had little clues, or, oh, that's a kind of plot spoiler for a very old film. But you know, you've kind of you've been introduced to all these ideas that then makes sense when that clicks in. You think, hang on, but oh yeah, that does work. So that's what I like about mystery, I think.
Another great question. Do you have more fun at creating the hero or the villain?
Yeah, because I'm not 100% sure that there's a villain in Nick's story. There is an antagonistic force going on, but nobody's twirling any mustaches in that book. So I think maybe I ought to start on that one. I spend the most amount of time thinking about the heroine, and the protagonist. That's the persons I live with for a long time, long before I put pencil to paper, when I'm trying to figure out, is this protagonist going to keep me occupied? Is this protagonist going to keep me interested and keep me at the table? So I spend a ton of time making sure that that's a person that I want to be living with, and I think that the reader might want to live with. And then when I figure out what the problem is, I then retrofit a villain to make that work. So I will do protagonist first, plot second, and then I go to central casting and say, please send me a supervillain who can do that for me. But that's the last character I create. The book I've just been writing the last couple of months, I love the antagonist. He's been so much fun to write. Absolute joy to write, and I didn't see that coming. I didn't think he was going to be an interesting character to write, but he snuck up on me while I wasn't looking, and I've just had a blast writing a bad guy for a while.
Yeah, I think the sort of villain for me, I guess I don't write the kind of books that, like you say, Dana, that don't necessarily have what you describe as a classic villain. And I think, I mean, they can come in many forms. And I think, you know, in a disaster movie, it's the elements, you know. In time travel, it was the rules around time travel that were so hard to break through for him. That was the villain in my book, was the rules that held him back. As the series is progressing, I have characters who disagree with the hero, fundamentally disagree with the hero, and as that conflict builds, they become a villain. But I like, my favorite kind of villains are the ones that are just really in that gray area, because, you know, light and dark, it's something I wish Star Wars would do a lot more with. You know, in Star Wars, it's always, you know, if you're a villain, you've got scars, but you wear black and you've got a red lightsaber. You know, that's so boring to me. I'm kind of like, surely there's a reason the dark side of the Force is tempting to people, and there must be something about it which is kind of interesting or good, or maybe they've got a fundamental, you know, belief system. So for me, I like to, you know, if I'm creating a villain, I really want them to be, you know, as complex and have all the desires and things that a hero would have. Someone said to me once, you know, the bad guys don't know they're the bad guys. They're the hero in their own story. So you don't want them kind of twiddling the moustache and kind of, you know, I am here to thwart you. You know, they're there to get done what they want to get done. And as long as you've got conflict between the hero, then yeah, I suppose it's a kind of, it's a villainous element to the story, I think is how I would describe it.
I definitely think you're right about Star Wars, by the way. I'm not a huge Star Wars fan because the 3 films in the middle a decade ago were so dreadful. But I do always think that bad guys have joined a union. Like, are you wearing the black suit? Okay, very good, thank you. And we won't have to report you to HR. Their bad guys are really so.
It would be so easy to infiltrate because you just need to wear black and have a red lightsaber, and you'd just be at the disco. You know, you'd be at the kind of like the Christmas bash, and you could just cut them all down. It's like, surely there's got to be something else about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, hopefully somebody will do it right one day.
Stormtrooper of the month, you get a good parking spot, you know,
yeah. So another question for one of our viewers, they asked, are you in any way similar to your protagonist? So this could go for either or both of you.
Well, Nick, I think you kicked that one off, man, because I think perhaps you guys are like.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first couple of books I wrote, no, I just, that was just a load of characters I created. But yeah, certainly Joseph Bridgman is basically, yeah, which is probably a big no-no, isn't it? But yeah, there's a lot of me in that book. So there's a lot of my things that I'm passionate about, the place, the approach, you know, his sort of, you know, I tried to imagine, you know, I want to be brave and I want to do cool things. And I'd love to think that if somebody was in trouble, I'd go and help them. But, you know, if there was someone drowning, there was a shark in the water, I don't know. I don't genuinely know whether I'd jump in and help them because I'm really scared of sharks. So you kind of think, I wanted to channel some of that, I suppose, and have a bit of fun with it. And working first person, I guess it's very difficult for it not to come out. So yeah, when someone says, oh, I didn't like the protagonist, it kind of hurts a bit more than it probably should. Because yeah, there's quite a lot of me in that book. But then again, people said they've enjoyed that because I've had plenty of readers say, I kind of felt like you were just chatting to me and it was kind of your diary, and they felt very close to him because of that. And first person can feel very claustrophobic if you're not really careful. So yeah, it's definitely, there's a lot of me in there, and there's a lot of other people that I interact with, or I wish I could interact with as well. So yeah, that's definitely, for Joseph Bridgman, that's definitely, there's a fair bit of me. He's a vinyl lover like me.
There is some amount, I'm not a very brave individual. When it comes to apocalypse, I tend to skedaddle, to use a Joss Whedon line. But Michael Finnegan in this book is an Irish American. He's got somewhat similar backgrounds to me. He's a cop. I've never been involved in law enforcement, but he's a feminist and he's a pretty modernistic feeling person. He really likes having a woman who's his partner. Obviously, I come out of journalism, so well over 50% of the people I work with are women. So that I do, and I'm going to spend a lot of time with my characters. And I thought the other day, I'd been thinking about this very question. Could I write a character who just is really, really, really protagonist, who's just anti-Dana? And the answer is no, I wouldn't want to spend that much time with that person. I don't think I would. If I go back and look at all of the protagonists in all of my books, a lot of them have reflected some of my values, which is how I then define them as being protagonistic.
Yeah. Let's see. Christine asks, how does it affect when you write about bad things happening to your good people? How does it affect you, sorry, when you write about bad things happening to your protagonists?
I have an external editor, very helpful. In one of the books I wrote, I killed off a protagonistic character, and my wife, Katie King, said, "Oh no, she doesn't die. She can't. I really like that character." And I said, "But sweetie, it's going to tug at the emotional heartstrings." And she said, "Did you not hear me? She doesn't die." I went, "Oh crap. Okay, well I guess she doesn't." In order to not make my wife unhappy, I had to change who died in one of the books. So I wrote 4 books with a character named Daria Gibran, who's a former Israeli spy and soldier, and she was a great deal of fun to have people throw bricks at, and she bled more and was injured more than any character ever had, because she was the person who would always run towards danger, and she was the least cerebral of my protagonists, but she was a lot of fun to hurt because she would always give back 1.7% better than she got. And so come at her with a knife and she comes back at you with a gun. And she was a grand fun. With Michael and Catalin, the protagonists of the Blackstone books, the big change that's happened to them is that their families don't know what they do for a living. They've had to lie to their families. Michael his dad was a cop, his sister's a cop, his uncles were cops. And now he's a bounty hunter, which is essentially illegal. He kidnaps people and takes them across national borders. And Catalin Fierro de Haar grew up very, very rich in a liberal family of academics, and she became a soldier for king and country, and then a spy, and then an assassin. So it's how do Michael and Catalin get back into their families? So the big arc over this book are the relationships and how they eventually can they return to the familial units that they had to give up when they started this job. So that's how I'm hurting these characters, and so far I've really been enjoying that thing. It helps that my own family and I aren't close, so there's that.
Yeah, it's a good question, that, and I think it's something I actually really struggle with as a writer, because I'm a very I try and avoid conflict as much as possible. I love everyone getting along. I love, good friends, family, all that stuff. So for me, you can't really write a good story where bad things don't happen to people. You've got to, it's one of those golden rules. You need all this conflict going on. That's definitely something that I kind of struggle with. And I think, but it has to be, it has to be done. And there's a writer that I like called Jim Butcher, and he talks a lot about, he absolutely loves putting his characters through hell. He just tortures them. And he said he just rubs his hands together with glee. And for me, it's not like that at all. I kind of think of the worst thing that can happen. I'm not thinking in glee. I'm kind of thinking, gosh, can I do that to them? But of course, when you do that's the writing really flows at that point, because you want to see the character in trouble. You want to see how they're going to get through it. And you've got this thing in the back of your mind, which is kind of saying, yeah, but I kind of know where I'm going to go with this. So yeah, they might be in trouble now, but I'm hoping I can get that back on. But I think it's about being brave. I think you have to be brave. You've got to throw the worst possible things at them at the worst possible time, and that is what will keep people reading. So that's what keeps me reading anyway. I don't want to read a long book about where everyone's getting along. It just doesn't work.
So the next question is a bit of a two-parter. We have 2 different questions that I'm just going to combine into one. So first from Kay is, can you tell us a bit about your typical writing day? And then in connection with that, Elizabeth, who's another one of our Blackstone authors, she asked how the pandemic has affected or not affected your writing practices. So what's your typical writing day? And then how has everything that's happened in the past year affected your writing practice?
I guess I could take that one. I am an idiot, and I write longhand in a steno pad with a pencil. So my first drafts are done in a very labor-intensive sort of way. And so I'll get up in the morning and I'll work on my fiction longhand, and then I'll do my day job, which is journalism. And then I come back in the evening and I translate it into my computer. And the reason that system has really worked for me, 2 reasons. One is because I grew up as a journalist. I've been doing this since I was in high school, and I'm used to taking notes longhand. That's my mechanism at every school board meeting, every city council meeting I was ever at. But it allows me to be creative and use the creative half of my mind in the morning, and then I translate it into the computer, which is my analytical half of my mind. And I can tell right then, right there, boy, what you wrote this morning was trash. That was terrible, Haynes. That did not move the plot forward. You're off base. You've lost the beam. Throw that out. Or I can say, wow, you know, that was pretty good. I sort of like that. And I'm able to do an analysis right away of the story, which because of that, I'm a relatively fast writer. I can generally write a first draft in 90 days because I'm analyzing on the spot as I go through and fixing things right away. The other question, the other half of the question is, I grew up in newsrooms, and so I like cacophony. I like a lot of noise and bustle. So I write really well in coffee shops. We have a world famous bookstore here in town called Powell's City of Books. It's one of the great bookstores of the world, and there's a coffee shop there. And I've written hundreds of pages sitting in the coffee shop at Powell's as people jostle around me and there's lots of noise. Because, you know, newsrooms, you have televisions with the news, and you've got telephones ringing off, and you've got the police scanner going on, you got people shouting at each other, and it's like, Haynes, when am I going to get that story I wanted? That's how if it's too quiet, I just simply can't write. So the pandemic meant I had to figure out a way to write without being in public, without being in coffee shops. And it was a bit of a challenge. I'll be honest with you.
Yeah, similar for me, I think. I mean, in terms of, yeah, so the sort of first part was the sort of typical writing day. I mean, if my friends would, I'm sure they just imagine that I sort of get out of bed at around 11 a.m., swan around drinking coffee with my thumb and forefinger to my forehead, kind of going, I wonder if inspiration will strike today, and sort of sipping coffee without wearing a cravat, you know. So, you know, that's, yeah, maybe one day. But at the moment, it's, I mean, I've worked for myself for sort of most of my career. So whether that's, you know, in whatever capacity. So I think you learn that, you know, nothing's going to get done if you don't really knuckle down and get on with it. So I have a pretty, I mean, I'm not strict about it. I used to be really strict about how many word counts I was hitting. I tracked everything. I was kind of obsessed with it. I've tried dictation. I've tried all these different tricks and techniques. In the end, I think it's just, I picked up this thing called as long as I have a non-zero day. So as long as I've moved that needle forward, whether it's, you know, sometimes if I stop writing, it's because I've just lost my way a bit, or I just don't know why the characters are doing a certain thing. I'll just stop and I'll just do some planning for a bit. I'll just think about it for a while until it just flows again. So I don't worry too much about specifically how much I've achieved that day, but I do put in a decent day. So, you know, it starts usually around a normal time and you end sort of 6, 7 p.m. or whatever. It's kind of, I'll just do a normal day. What was the second part of the question?
Pandemic.
Oh yeah. So I mean, for me, I mean, being an author, I think you are fairly well attuned to solitude. You have to be in terms of just being inside your own head. But I mean, even this has been way too much for me. So really stewing, you know, obviously not completely alone, but being kind of locked in and not being able to move around and get some of that. I just like movement. I like movement. I like a little bit of travel, like you, Dana, going to coffee shops, stuff like that. I think noise cancelling headphones. So it's not so much about the noise. It's more about just the bustle and movement and people and stuff like that I really miss. And I think the other side of it is just missing that normal top up that we need as human beings, is just seeing friends, letting off some steam, doing some fun, you know, traveling around and stuff like that. It's actually not the writing itself that I've been as suffered. It's more, I think, mental health that we need. It's really reminded us all, I think, that we need these touch points and these extra things coming in to just balance your life in general, I think, no matter what you do. So yeah, writing wise, obviously there's no silver linings to a pandemic, but writing wise, I've just got a lot done. But I'm looking forward to things going back to normal again.
Yeah, somebody was joking, novelists were introverts. We were doing social distancing before it was cool.
Yes. Yeah, I used to say to people, well, you know, I work from home, and now it's just kind of like, right, you know.
As opposed to what?
Yeah. I think earlier on, actually, in the pandemic, it was like, well, I'm used to this. I think for a lot of people that was a bit of a novelty. It was almost like an inverse thing. I think for me, I was kind of finding that, well, I'm used to this, and then it got worse. And I think for some people, they kind of went, oh wow, we're going to work from home. It's going to be okay. And then it got, you know, it's sort of, I think it was different for them.
Another question from one of our viewers. They asked, what is the best personal advice you could give someone to writing their debut novel and or a series?
Yeah, I would say you got to finish it. I mean, there's so many things you could say. You could say, you know, I think for me, if I hadn't published as an indie and then found, you know, and found Blackstone and we got together and we did it all again, it's kind of like, you know, if I hadn't been brave enough to publish as an indie, nothing would have happened. So, but you can't publish a book if you haven't finished it. So I think there's lots of people say, I've got this idea for a book, or I've got this, you know, really great idea, but I mean, ideas are everywhere. It's like you've actually got to finish it, and that's the hardest thing. It doesn't matter whether it's awful. You know, my first attempt to write a novel was awful, but at least I finished it, and then I learned something, and I moved on to the next one. And I think that one didn't get released, by the way. But you know, it's sort of, I think, yeah, that would be the main thing. There's so much advice. My goodness, there's probably 100 things that you want to tell somebody, but I think that would be the main one, is you've got to finish that book, because you'll learn so much from the process. It's basically practice. Yeah, every book is practice. You don't become a great novelist or anything. It's just constant practice.
And unfortunately, my advice is exactly the same thing. You can't fix what's just not on paper. And you know, you'll go to the conventions and you'll meet somebody who'll say, you know, I'm working on this novel and I think it's really great. I'm on chapter 1. I've been on chapter 1 since 2014, and as soon as it's perfect, I'm going to move on. And you're always like, oh, sweet mother of God, you know, you're doomed. You can't do that. So what I've taught writing, and one of the things I say is that your first draft should look terrible. Your first draft should be dreadful. Just get it done. The most important words are the end. And so when I'm writing, again, on legal pads, in steno pads, I will come to a scene where they walk into a bar, and then I will put in the brackets the word splaino, S-P-L-A-I-N-O, which means I'm going to explain what that looks like, but I'm not doing it today. Or I'll write scripto. I'm going to describe that car, but I'm not doing it today. Today, I'm just going to get to the end of the chapter. It's a first draft. It's got little squiggly notes in it. It's going to be fine. I can leave little things while he meets somebody, figure out who later. Just keep going. Try and get to the end. If you've written the end, then you can sit down, wait a week or two, print the damn thing out, go through it, find what you need to fix. By the way, a ton of the clues you put in a mystery aren't in the first draft. They're in the third or fourth draft. I realize, oh, I need him to have a cousin deep in the book. Guess what? I better go introduce the cousin early. No problem. That's why it's called a first draft. So I always say exactly what Nick said is, get it on paper, get it done, get it, because once it's on paper, you can fix it. If it's not, you can't. And the thing that dispirits first-time writers is not seeing any traction. You know, nothing's happened and nothing's happened and nothing's happened, and maybe I should do something else. And if you're thinking, yeah, something's happening and it's not great, it's a mess right now, but I'm still moving forward and I can actually see a light at the end of the tunnel, you can fix it all later. So get it done.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And kind of similar to that, for writing a series of books, Carl asked, do you have the full story laid out and split into book-sized chunks, or do you write first and plan and create as you go?
Nick and I are going to have diametrically opposite answers to this. I don't know the ending of any book when I start it. I'm an ex-theater geek. That may be a little obvious. And so I write in Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, and I know Act 1 and the plot point that gets me out of Act 1, and I know Act 2 and the plot point that gets me out of that, but I don't know how they end usually. And so at some point, I will be driving, or I'll be showering, or I'll be in the produce aisle at the store and think, you know how it could end? Oh, that's pretty good. That's how it's going to end. And then I can go back and retrofit all of that stuff later in subsequent drafts. So I have in my head an idea for this series that I'm doing it. And this series is very much character driven, not plot driven. I know who Michael and Catalin are. I know what arcs they're going through in their lives with their families and with each other as best friends. And I'll figure out the books and the plot and the bad guy du jour as I move along. But no, I don't know any of that stuff. I'm very much a seat of my pantser.
Yeah, and for me, actually, it's evolved, and I think every book for me has been different, which has been kind of weird. Every time I think I've got my way of working it shifts again. And I think when I first started writing, I was definitely exploring. So I didn't know how the first Joseph Bridgman book was going to end. I had no clue. I just worked on the first act, like Dana said. I worked on that first act, and then the book actually just revealed itself to me, and it was like a lightning bolt. I was like, oh my God, that's what happens. That's perhaps what always happened. I've found it. I've kind of revealed it. And I think after that, I went into a very deep planning phase. I thought, I want this to be a series. There's going to be numerous books in there. I don't want to write myself into a point. There's actually one of the questions I can see in the chat about books tend to run out of steam after the third or fourth book. And I thought that was a really good question, because yeah, I feel that too sometimes. And I think the way to keep that fresh is character. As long as you've got really interesting characters that you can put into interesting situations, it shouldn't get stale, because that's life. So you kind of think, I wanted to do a certain amount of planning, but I see my planning now as like drawing things on a beach. So I'm drawing things in the sand, and I see it, and I can see the whole book. And I think, just to try and answer the question, I can see the whole book, and I've got this kind of distant sense of what the whole series is going to be doing. And maybe I can see right at the end. Actually, it's more like a jigsaw, but let's go back to the beach a minute. So I sort of scratch it all out of the beach, and I can see it. And then the tide comes in and washes all that away, and that goes back out again. But it leaves just a few traces, and I just continue to. So it's sort of like a mixture of planning and then pantsing, and then planning and then pantsing. So there's no fixed thing for me. But yeah, I think I know now pretty much exactly what I'm going in the book that I'm working on. But the series as a whole, I've just got directions and main events that I know are going to happen at some point, but I want to keep it fresh for me too. So I don't plan those out too much. So I mean, I know what's going to happen at the very, very end of the whole series, but I don't know how I'm going to get there yet.
An example of that is Robert Cray, C-R-A-I-S. He's been writing the Elvis, Nicole, and Joe Pike mysteries since, I think, literally the late 80s. And the Damn series is really, really good, and it's really, really exciting. But the reason is exactly what you just said, is that Bob loves writing those two characters. He loves his characters, and he spends so much time with their relationship and their ethics, and they have a code in this world. And then so the stories, for me, every single one of his books is money in the bank, because the stories are never about who's the bad guy, how'd the bad guy do it. It's about Elvis and Joe and their code, and how their code slams up to the crime and corruption of the world. So again, he loves his character so much. Those books seem fresh, decade after bloody decade. I don't know how the hell he does it, but I think Cray's a genius.
So we're in the final few minutes of our webinar. So I'm going to end on a question that maybe kind of wraps things up. And then if there's anything else you would like to tell the wonderful audience. So we have a question: what are you currently working on? And then any final thoughts you might have.
I'll go ahead and take that first, then, if you don't mind. I have actually finished the first draft of the third Finnegan and Fierro book, and the story arc has been their separation from their families. Michael from his family of New York cops, Catalin from her liberal and very rich family in Spain, and that was sort of the essence of book one. The essence of book two is Catalin really had to confront her family. Book three is about Michael and his family. So I'm working on that one right now, and I'm having an awful lot of fun. And as I mentioned earlier, I came up with an antagonist who ended up being so much fun to write. I'm just having a blast.
Yeah, and I'm funny enough, I've just come to the end of the first draft of the third Joseph Bridgman book. So yeah, that felt good to get that one in the bag. I'm planning book 4, and then I'll be going back and doing a bit of editing on obviously on book 3. So yeah, the second Joseph Bridgman book is coming out in June. So that's The Shadows of London. That's out in June, and then the third book after that. So that's what I'm working on. It's just the Joseph Bridgman series. I'm quite happy to keep going on that as long as I can. So yeah, that's what I'm working on. So I'm sorry, there's quite a lot of questions in the chat here that I was really, I could try and speed answer some of these, if that would be all right, Hannah. I could just dive in and just speed answer a few. There's a couple that look quite interesting.
Yeah, go for it.
Have we got a hard stop, or are we all right just for a couple more minutes?
No, we're good for a couple more minutes.
Okay. So someone asked if there'd be more Vinny, which is one of my favorite characters. You're going to love book 2 if you haven't read that one. If you haven't read because there were some previous editions of the books. So yeah, loads more Vinny. He's a constant character in the series. He's Joe's kind of sidekick, really. He's his best mate. So yeah, don't worry, there'll be plenty more Vinny. Whisper Stars, Embers of Hope. Those are some books I wrote early on. I'm not going to carry on with that series at the moment, so I've actually taken those down for a bit. So it's all about Joseph Bridgman at the moment, but I'll never say never. So I might, who knows? They might make a comeback. Psychometry was an unexpected ability, and I kind of combine that with time travel because I always love the idea that inside objects there is history, and I just love the idea that, and that's something I really expand upon in the series. Psychometry is a big part of time travel, and the clues that you can get. I love this idea that objects kind of their energy grows as they get older. So that was definitely something I wanted to get in there. And yeah, I think that was the, oh yeah, and the new editions of the books. So someone asked about the new editions. So these are the Blackstone editions of the books. I worked with a great editor, and it's more about adding content actually. We took a little bit of stuff out, but the main thing was just sharpening it up, and it was more focused on Joe's backstory and a bit more with his sister, so that they're expanded editions really, and just a little bit sharpened up, but the core story is still the same. So they're worth a reread, but the core story is still there. So if you read the original way back when versions, and then you just picked up books 2 or 3, that's fine. You'd get along fine. So yeah, thanks, Hannah. I just thought there was a few I just thought I've got to answer those before we finish up.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I'm glad that everyone was able to join us today. This was live streamed on Facebook. It's also being recorded currently, so we will have that posted. So anyone who was not able to watch the whole thing or missed out can go ahead and watch the recording of it. And Dana and Nick are great authors, very personable. And if we didn't get to any of your questions, I'm sure they will be happy to answer them at another time. And if there's any parting remarks before we end.
If you got questions, send them to danahaynesmystery.com. That's all one word, danahaynesmystery.com. I speak for Nick when I say we'd be glad to respond to questions from readers and listeners. Yeah,
likewise, love hearing from people. So yeah, you can get. I mean, I'll try and dive into the chat after this to see if there's any other questions. But yeah, you can contact me. Just check out the websites, nickjonesauthor.com. You can find out everything there. But yeah, no, it's been fun. It's been really nice to see some people in the chat, and a few people have said it's nice to see. Yeah, so yeah, it's nice to see you too.
Great. Well, thanks for joining us, and read the books. I'll post the link to buy them in the description on the Facebook. And thanks. Bye, everyone.
Thanks a lot.